Okay, so we talked about different data types, and here he mentions integer and double. And he says most PCs are still 32-bit, although 64-bit are now common. This means they are optimized for 32-bit integer values. Just a side note there. An integer is stored as a string of 32 bits. So that's how, when you declare something to be an integer, the compiler or the computer reserves 32 bits of memory, or in other words, 4 bytes of memory. Okay? And then he says that one of those bits, the first one, is called the sign bit. So out of the 32, one of them is called the sign bit, and that's used to indicate the sign of the number. So is it a positive number or a negative number? And the remaining 31 bits indicate the number value. So then you can figure out, well, how many different values are possible? Basically, we know that formula we talked about a little bit. It's 2 to the 32. So that turns out to be, if you split it between positive and negative, it goes down to this number, which is what, minus 2 billion and something, and up to 2 billion and something. And he says, note, all 32 bits will be used regardless of the value. What he means by that is even if you declare some variable like x to be an integer, and you say, oh, x equals 1, it doesn't matter. The computer's going to reserve the same amount of memory for that because you declared it as an integer. So basically, it means you could change it to some other value. So the computer has to sort of in advance, or the compiler has to in advance reserve a certain amount of memory. So it reserves 32 bits. Next, he says, for working with larger integers, we have another type. So instead of declaring it an integer, we could call it a long. That reserves 64 bits, which is what, 8 bytes. So we have this range here. Okay. Instead of 2 to the 31st, we have 2 to the 63rd. And it's minus and plus. The first byte is still reserved for whether it's a positive or a negative. Next, he says the short and the byte types are also available for efficiently working with small integers. So a short is only 2 bytes, and a byte is only 1 byte, but is unsigned. So bytes are in this range, so it's not negative numbers, and bytes are mainly used for working with bit strings. That means for data transfer. So basically, we won't run into that, at least not in our first course.